All right, I'll get started, everybody. Thank you for coming. I get the coveted post-lunch slot, so let's try to be interactive so that none of you fall asleep and so that I don't fall asleep either. I was thinking this morning, so I used to do some presentations when I started in Mindset. I'd go around to ASUGs and stuff. This is the first in-person, like up in the front of the room presentation that I've done in 3.5 or 4 years. So that's my excuse if it's terrible. Right? I'm just out of practice. I used to be really good at it. I just might not be good at it anymore. Well, thanks for coming. So what I'm going to talk about today is, it's funny because the last session that I saw was how to do kind of small Fiori projects, which Mike Berg presented with David Keithers from MB Global. This is sort of the other end of that spectrum. This is, as you're maturing in an organization, as you're looking to drive a lot more scale in the way that you can deliver these types of applications or this type of functionality, these are some of the things that we've done with some of our customers and some of the things that we've developed internally that kind of help tips and tricks on how to scale those types of things. Really quick, so who am I? So I've been with Mindset now for just over 7 years. My title is Operating Officer, but what that really means in practice is I have accountability, two primary levels of accountability. One is for our delivery organization, so the project teams that we put out at our customers, I am accountable to make sure that they do a good job. And sometimes I'm the person that gets called when they're not doing as good of a job as they should be. And then the other half of that is our company's execution as a company. So how are we doing? How are we growing? How are we scaling? How are we making sure that we're going to continue to do a good job even as we're growing as a company? Before I was at Mindset, I had a career in IT. I was not a consultant before I was at Mindset. I actually worked with Joe here at Xcel Energy for a little while. And then the majority of my previous career was at Target, the latter half of which I was a basis and infrastructure manager. So some of the stuff we talk about in here around like how to partner with other portions of your organization who are going to be impacted by development and delivery, I have some real scars to show around when that doesn't always happen as well as it should. I live here in sunny Minneapolis, up in Plymouth. That's my family over there, without my dog. And in theory, it's baseball and golf season, but not yet in practice. So hopefully that's turning around pretty quickly. So I put this slide up here, and I can click into the thing, but really so why are you listening to me? Why am I talking about this? Part of the reason is because we've done a lot of this. We, Mindset, have done a lot of this, and we've done a lot of this in partnership with a bunch of the people that are in this room. So that's what we're talking. That's why we're up here talking, and this is one of the things that we've done quite a bit of over the course of the year. We've delivered hundreds of apps, design thinking, Fiori, but also other front-end technologies, React and Flutter and all kinds of other things. So it's not just that. And as I go through the presentation, I'm going to try to stay technology agnostic for the most part. Most of it's going to be tied to ERP and SAP, obviously. But a lot of these theories apply beyond just Fiori, even if that's kind of what we've probably done the most of as an organization. And I will say, when I joined Mindset, we had a couple big customers, but I've been here in various different roles throughout the growth of that. So I've had a pretty good front seat to what we've learned and how we've gotten there and kind of how this has changed. So what are we talking about? So in a little bit more detail. So again, it kind of goes back to the contrast that I drew before, which is you're at a point in your organization where you want to significantly grow the capability that you have to deliver great user experiences and through applications, deliver great applications to your user base and to your customers. And what that amounts to is kind of what we're talking about here in general at this summit is just delivering a better experience to your users across the board, right? And again, specific to SAP. So how did we get here? And when I say what led us here, what I mean is why did we Mindset start to create this type of an approach with our customers? We did it jointly with a lot of our customers. This isn't something that we just sat in a room and thought up and then went out and rolled out and it was perfect. A lot of this came organically through a lot of the conversations that we had with our customers. One of the reasons was what we did typically, or what we did especially earlier on, is we did projects, right? We'd go and a customer would say, I have a problem, I need to solve a specific issue with my EWM system, it needs a better user interface. We go through design thinking, We'd execute a development project, we'd roll it out, and it was good, right? And a lot of times, that's still the right option. But sometimes our customer would say, well, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 applications, and they span additional capabilities, multiple capabilities, and oh, by the way, I've already got 3 or 4 applications in production. How do I kind of build an organization around this? And how can you help with some of the practices that you put in place at Mindset? How can you help us build something that looks like that? The other thing, that second bullet point around, I think whenever we're going to talk about Agile a little bit today. There are constraints that exist within the context of Agile development when you add in the ERP portion to it, right? Those constraints are lessening, I think, but especially when we started 5, 6, 7 years ago, the combination of ERP and Agile was not terribly common. And I think some of those constraints still exist. The obvious one being, moving changes and change control and production deployments, things like that. So figuring out how to mitigate some of the limitations and some of the constraints that organizations have within their ERP implementation or within the change control processes that their ERP implementation have was another key consideration for us to kind of move in this direction. And the last one, and this is maybe the one that has emerged to be, I don't know what the most important, but one of the really important pieces is if you do things project by project and if you do things piecemeal, it's far more likely that you're going to get a result that reflects that piecemeal approach. Whereas if you can take a step back and you can take a look holistically across, here's all the stuff that we need to do, you're able to then also strategically define the way in which you can do that most effectively in order to create a cohesive transformation. And what I mean by that, I mean just a really basic example is, if you have a set of user experience or UI standards, your ability to apply UI standards across a broad set of applications are going to be is going to be vastly improved if you can also kind of apply it across the intake of those applications from a centralized standpoint, right? So some of those things.
Would you characterize at what point in that scale or spectrum would you say going to a full-blown design system is a necessity, or would you say that there are maybe some marginal improvements that you could get to without going quite that far?
I think, I don't know that I have sort of a specific sort of threshold that I would be able to articulate. I would say as you're starting to see multiple different initiatives stack up and you're starting to see more of a pipeline, one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit today is kind of demand pipeline, right? But if you have what I would consider a sustainable demand pipeline, meaning to say, hey, I can not only see the next project, but I can see the next 3 or the next 5, or I know that this one project is going to span 18 months and I've got 7 other projects that need to go on the side, that's when it's the right time, or even before that hopefully, is the right time to step back and say, oh, I need a plan for all of this, rather than trying to hope that all 7 projects all get executed successfully and all kind of taking those same pieces. So it really comes, and it's going to be a little bit different for every organization, but a lot of times it comes when you have a sense of, hey, I know this is coming. Ideally, you're even more proactive than that, but that's really difficult for a lot of organizations in practice to be able to do, if that makes sense. And thank you, Joe, for starting. I should say, raise your hand, interrupt, argue if you feel so inclined, and I'm happy to make this a conversation. So what are some of the key ingredients? A lot of these are not going to come as a surprise based upon who we are and what we do and kind of what Mindset does, but wanted to talk through a couple of these. Design-led focus. So for us, you heard Sam this morning. Hopefully, you've probably heard us talk about design thinking probably too much in a lot of different cases, but it's something that we strongly believe in because of a lot of the stuff that Sam talked about and because of a lot of the things that we've seen proven over the years. I'm not going to belabor that too much today. That's not what this presentation is about, but starting with design is a really important piece because it does provide a much clearer vision for what each individual piece is going to do and how they can all fit together. And also really starts to initiate that value focus, which is what we really want to be able to be reinforcing as part of this conversation. For us, an Agile delivery approach is if not require, is pretty much required for this to be successful at scale. And that's a lot of the core of what we're talking about. But again, the reason for that is when you're thinking about how those multiple projects and how those multiple engagements are going to stack up, it's inevitable that you're going to have 3 to 5 projects that are overlapping in time, and you're going to have to start making decisions based upon the capacity that you have to deliver functionality. Which features and functions of project A are more important than project B, are more important than project C. And you're going to likely have to start making decisions across multiple projects on how to prioritize. Having an Agile capability in place, or an Agile delivery format in place in order to be able to do that, provides you an inherent advantage because it's already built to do that, right? It's already built to ensure that you're prioritizing the most valuable pieces to the top of the backlog and executing those first. And then so the jump to doing that across multiple projects is a shorter one than if you were doing sort of waterfall where you're trying to get everything done from project A and then project B. It just makes that leap, and I think that the transition a lot easier.
So would you characterize, how would you approach an organization that kind of has a cultural disparity from, focused on Agile to really anchored in a more traditional project and waterfall type approach to delivery? Do you have some advice on how to balance against that?
So the question is, what is my advice for a company that is likely more anchored in a waterfall type of an approach, but has pockets of Agile, probably not in ERP because that's usually not where it starts, and has maybe some intent of moving in that direction? So usually what I would say is, don't try to do what I'm talking about today as your first Agile approach, right? You're likely going to try to start a little bit smaller. And usually that's what it comes down to for us. Where we see those types of companies be most successful is find a win, right? Find a way to win. And with a lot of the companies that we ended up doing this type of an approach with, that's where it started. It didn't start with this, right? But I think what you can do if you execute that type of a project well, you can start to see, you can start to demonstrate the benefit, which is always much more effective than just talking about the benefit. And you also start to plant some of the seeds of, this is what it takes for us to do this organizationally. And actually that's a nice segue to this next piece, which is the concept of products versus projects within an organization, and the big impact that has, right? So show of hands, who would consider their organization a product-based organization versus a project-based organization? Got one, which is...
Aspirationally, yeah.
Well, aspirationally, I would probably say a lot more, right? And
Do I like it? No.
so you don't like it. Okay, so we'll talk after, but you can't undermine my entire presentation to start with. But let's go down this premise of what the product base. So let me ask a different question. Who thinks that if they came up here, and I'm not going to make you do this, so you can raise your hand. Who thinks they could come up here and define what that means to be product-based versus project-based? Show of hands. Who thinks they could do that effectively? Joe does. You do? So I'll give you my best shot, and you guys can probably argue with a bunch of this as well. But for me, when we think about the way that we deliver functionality within within an organization, not an IT organization, within an organization, a product base says, I have a function or I have a capability that I need to be able to deliver to my business, and my business is going to drive the pieces of that are going to be required, and I'm going to drive that based upon their vision of what they need. Whereas a project base, for me, is I have a budget of work that needs to be done from point A to point B. I'm going to follow that through. I'm going to get that project done and then move on to the next project, right? It becomes much more segmented, whereas the product allows you to iterate within the context of a function and prioritize within a function instead. That's probably not a perfect definition, but...
Yeah, I would have characterized it more leaning into the life cycle side of that.
Correct, yeah.
Because products have that duration, the durability that lives beyond what typically we characterize as a project.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at industrial products or commercial and consumer products, they have a lifespan.
Right.
And the product owner or product manager, portfolio manager is responsible for understanding replace it with something
Right.
that fulfills the same need or more, but,
Right.
make sure that you make a smooth transition to that, whatever that next thing is. And that's part of the role of product ownership.
Right, and correlates also to the agile approach, right? And the reason why I talk about this in the context of this, of what we're talking about today is that the role of the product owner is probably one of, if not the most critical role in the success of any individual project. And within the context of trying to build a scalable set of teams and products, also takes on an even more substantial role in a lot of cases, right? Because that product owner is now not only required to define and advocate for their own individual piece, but they also have to do that against the other priorities that are going to be set forth when they're looking to potentially do these against multiple other products that are being developed simultaneously, right? So they become one of the owners within a team of product owners that need to identify kind of, hey, here's where we're going. This is why my piece is more important, or this is where the value is going to come from my product, and this is how we're going to allocate resources and time against that. Without that product ownership, I guess to oversimplify it, it's really difficult to have enough vision or have enough understanding of roadmap to be able to set up multiple teams to be successful long term. And last but not least, and this can go for anything, right? But you need organizational buy-in. So this is not a thing that you can do in a back office with a team of a couple of people that are kind of creating stuff, right? You can't get away with that with this type of an approach. If you're looking to do these types of things at scale, you need buy-in from multiple pieces of the organization, because ultimately you're going to need to get a lot of insight or a lot of help and a lot of partnership from a lot of other folks in the organization as well. So why would you do this, right? Why would you set up an organization, or why would you set up a team wherein you can create a kind of a consolidated intake and a set of resources that can scale up and down with demand? Why would you do that? So number one is it becomes more, I mean, it's in the title, but it becomes more scalable, more flexible. So in January of 2023, you have an insight into what your demand pipeline looks like. You need to scale your team up to meet that demand pipeline. In March, it might be lower. In June, it might be twice as much as what it was in January. Having a common team and a common process to be able to address that demand allows you to move resources in more effectively and flex that team up, and then at the same time flex that team down as the resources or as the demand lessens. Now, if you're going in a project-based approach, if you're going project by project, your ability to flex with that team is obviously going to be far more limited, because you're going to be constrained by the set of resources and the hours that were built into that project plan initially, right? So this allows you a little bit more flexibility. Now, also, if the demand changes it comes from area A and now it's coming from area C, you have a better ability to transition those resources more effectively from the function that they were working on to another one that might be coming in. And from a partner standpoint, if you're using a partner to help with this, they're going to benefit and gain share and risk share from some of that flexibility and demand and capacity as well. So the next one I had talked about a little bit, but this really reinforces the focus on driving value or focusing on value. So rather than having to fight for every single project to come through, you should be looking at, well, what is the most important capability that we're going to be able to deliver to our business based upon what they're bringing from a product standpoint, right? So again, in January, it may be this set of functionality from a particular capability, and then you can shift and deliver additional functionality to a different piece if that value is deemed a higher value outcome for that team or for the organization. Now, hopefully what you're also able to do with this is do a more coordinated planning, right? So this isn't all just happening on the fly, right? You're looking out in front and saying, okay, what does it look like 6 months from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, et cetera. and you're able to help define that roadmap across all of those different portions of the organization at a holistic level, right? Rather than at yes or no to a project, it's, well, let's deliver some of these capabilities in within each of the places that the demand is coming from.
Do you see a level of recognition of dependencies in a lot of the engagements that you have, or does that prioritization occur more independent of the understanding of the downflow of dependencies on?
Are you talking about dependencies from like a technology level, or from a more of a?
Probably more. Well, I would group it as a combination of technology affinity and feature affinity. So their features tend to group together to provide in terms of value proposition, and there may be some technical affinity to that feature set.
Okay.
And I'm just curious if you see organizations having a fairly strong discipline around recognizing and prioritizing those things that correlate well together.
I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I do think that if you're able to establish, I go back to sort of that coordinated planning and vision standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're able to, through this, if you're able to drive the type of collaboration across multiple business units that hopefully come from that, because they're going to be talking with one another and identifying what some of those things are. If you go through some of those larger increment planning type of an activity, you are likely to see some of those things fall out more quickly than they might if they were working in more of a siloed project-based approach. It's not perfect, right? But it's likely to help out quite a bit. In terms of the technology piece, and this is something I'm going to talk about in the next slide, it's a lot of the dependencies that you're going to have on partner teams. That's a very kind of critical piece of this, right? So enterprise architecture, basis and security, all those other places that you always are going to be needing to rely on to deliver this. You've got to be very proactive and explicit with how you engage them within this process, so that they can contribute to, or at least not inhibit, some of the things that you're trying to deliver from a functionality standpoint. The last thing, and this is really, I mean, I'm trying not to make this sort of a from a mindset approach, right? But this last one is really kind of from, if I think about this as somebody who's looking to partner with our customers, right? Our ability to provide competitive pricing or even improved pricing on resources to deliver functionality to your organization is directly correlated to, commitment and demand certainty and all those types of things, right? So if you know that you've got a backlog, if you know you've got a roadmap that's going to be able to execute for 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, then hopefully most of your partners would reflect that with the way that they're coming to the table with you in terms of what that looks like. So, from my standpoint, if I've got a team of 150 developers, it's a lot easier for me to say, well, yeah, I'm going to give you a great deal of those developers because I know they're going to be busy for the next 18 months versus what it takes if you just need them for the next 3, right? That certainty has value. Now, that also exists internally, I think, too, right? That's not just a vendor relationship thing. Internally, obviously, you're going to be more likely to be able to justify a full-time hire if you have 2 years of work for that full-time hire defined, or at least a pretty high confidence in the demand for that resource versus what you might do short-term with a contract resource, which is going to be likely more expensive for you at that time. So what does this look like? What are some of the key elements for this? I talked about these a little bit, but the first one is it does require a level of coordination in planning and road mapping that may not exist already for a lot of you in what you do, right? And so, I haven't used the term SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework in this presentation, but because we don't necessarily promote that at the really detailed level, but that's a lot of the concepts that we're talking about here. So it kind of come from that SAFe capability. And one of the concepts of SAFe is the type of increment planning that happens every 8 weeks or so, right? Which is to say, hey, we need to get everybody together in a room and we need to talk about what is happening over the next 8 weeks. How are we going to coordinate? How are we going to resource or share around capabilities to be able to deliver that demand? How are we going to prioritize effectively, and how are we going to plan all the partner teams and all the other pieces that are required to deliver that? Right, so again, when I contrast that to a project-based approach, there's certainly still coordination that needs to happen with the project, right? But the level of coordination and the level of alignment across multiple resources that are all likely to use that same set of capacity from a delivery standpoint is probably going to be quite a bit lower at a project level than when you're going to have just a set of dedicated resources that are going to execute this project from June 1st to August 31st. Right, so that level of coordination, getting everybody aligned on that same roadmap is a really important kind of a key piece of this. The second piece is around strategic governance. I've talked about value quite a bit. Using value as the guide here is really key. But also, you need to use this as an opportunity. You need to make sure that you're still doing all the things that you need to do as an IT organization in terms of engaging your strategic enterprise partners. So enterprise architecture, security, some of those other places that are going to drive a lot of the guardrails that you're going to need to continue to follow as you execute the delivery of these projects. So you can't get away from that with this, right? And it even kind of reinforces it. Now, hopefully, they're participating with you in some of those strategic planning meetings. Again, if it's like an increment planning sort of a thing, they're at the table with you, making sure that those pieces are being aligned, and they're participating then in the increment or in the sprints that happen throughout as needed. But it's really important, obviously, to continue to have them be part of the partnership. Talked a little bit about agile development teams, and again, kind of the concept here being thinking less about I've got project team A, project team B, project team C, and project team D, right? And thinking more about I've got a team of developers, a team of scrum masters, a team of architects, whatever that sort of resource mix looks like. And as the demand from functional teams A, B, and C change, I can leverage that demand across whichever one it has the most need at that particular point in time. So, and another way to think about this that we've seen as well is we might even look at, in some cases, instead of taking a big project that's going to require a team of 30 people, we would break that into multiple teams that then kind of play this role as well, right? So even within a specific functional area, breaking into multiple teams, a lot of times we gain a level of efficiency by having smaller teams that are able to focus on a particular piece of that functionality or a particular piece of that application and go forward with it. Coordinated release planning. So this is kind of now as you're moving through and you're delivering on the functionality that you've taken in and you're ready to move into production. In order to get the most value out of what the team has created, and in order to maintain things like stability and all those things that are important to actually delivering functionality in your organization, you've got to make sure that you've got a plan and you've got those teams together. Also, at the other end of the spectrum, when it's time to move them into move changes into QA, go through testing, and ultimately go through production, go into production, go live. So the same level of coordination that you executed at the beginning has to come through at the end, even if they've gone and executed independently within the meantime. Bringing them back at the time of release planning is really important, because a lot of times what you'll see is, or what we've seen is, you're still working on a shared instance like SAP with a lot of shared resources and a lot of things, a lot of dependencies like Joe was talking about. So you've got to make sure that you're managing those dependencies. Last but not least, I put on there integrated support. This kind of goes off into into sort of a DevOps type of a conversation. But what I wanted to kind of, and I don't know if integrated support is exactly the right language, but what I wanted to convey here is back to that product-based approach, the demand that you're going to be putting into the front end of this process, or the next set of functionalities to be delivered, a lot of times that's going to come from what are you hearing when you go into production, right? One of the things that we preach or that we really try to do is when something goes into production, we want to continue to get feedback on what we're seeing in that productive environment, use that as input to drive additional value back into the product. So that level of integrated support or finding a way to get that insight from a productive system and feed that back into the process is really important for the whole cycle to be really effective. Not only that, but what we've seen a lot of time as well, and organizations differ on this, but the people who built the application, if you have commonality between the folks who delivered the application with the folks who are ultimately supporting it in production, their level of efficiency goes up quite a bit because they know the applications because they built, they were in there rather than doing a knowledge transfer, documentation, transition, all those sorts of things. Couple things, I think I've talked about this quite a bit already, but I'll just reinforce. Business engagement, and this goes back a lot to the concept of product ownership. Without having a business that understands why you're taking this approach and is bought in, and in a lot of cases it just comes down to is willing to dedicate resources and time and effort, it's a lot less likely to be successful. What we see in a lot of situations is we still have a gap between where the IT organization are the folks who are driving the vision on behalf of somebody from the business who is not necessarily dedicated or available enough to participate directly. And that gap and that translation and all those things come with all the trade-offs that you usually see, right? Which is, it doesn't quite look how they wanted it to look. It doesn't hit all the pieces. It just doesn't have that same level of alignment to what the business is actually looking for because it's gone through a filter. It's gone through a translation piece. The other piece of this too, when we talk about prioritization, the business needs to understand and participate in, what is the most important thing for our organization to accomplish at a particular at a particular point in time, right? Not just did my project get approved or not, but how is my project and the value of my project standing up to what else is being proposed? And likely they're the ones who are in the best position to obviously provide that value proposition to begin with, so they need to be participating in that process. Organizational buy-in, so beyond just your business partners, this goes back to partner teams. Making sure you have security and basis and all those sorts of things. Because again, being able to make sure that you're an enabling capability rather than, or that they are at the table with you to enable those capabilities, even if they're not going to be operating in a similar agile fashion, is going to be really important. So last thing, or not quite the last thing, but a little bit more detail on value proposition. So what I put up here is, this is actually real data from a project. It's not from anybody, it's not from any projects of customers in this room, if you're curious. But this is what I would call sort of a typical, what I would see as a typical standard project cost. And I'll explain what this is really quickly. So bottom row are the number of sprints. So let's say this is 20 sprints, so this is like a 40-week effort. The yellow line, or the blue lines then are how much functionality, how many story points did I deliver over that period of time. And the yellow line represents what is the cost per point, or how much money am I spending per element of value that I'm delivering, right? And what you see normally is, it starts higher, and you can see it starts up here in the, 40, and again, this is modified, but $40 per point range. Kind of goes way up to, almost 100 because we had a tough sprint there, but then settles and kind of you get to this normalized version, which is down there around 20, right? Some version of that. This is what we see all the time, right? What you guys have probably seen, the type of curves that you've seen all the time as well. So part of the reason why this approach helps to drive and improve value proposition for that is you can take out a lot of the inefficiencies that you get in those first few weeks of this first periods of the sprint, right? So number one, you're onboarding and acclimating folks less frequently, right? So how long does it take you to onboard a resource at your company? Right? How long? 6 weeks? That's better than it used to be. It's better than it used to be. 6 weeks. How long does it take not only to get them a laptop and an ID, how long does it take them to understand what you're trying to accomplish as an organization? How long does it take for them to try to understand, what even your specific part of the organization is trying to do, right? That all reduces that resource's efficiency, right? So if you're building a set of capacity from a resource standpoint versus onboarding somebody for a project and then offboarding them and then onboarding them back on again, you're able to take that person more effectively, move them to another piece within that delivery organization that you're looking for and reduce a lot of that. Now they're still gonna have to come up to speed on some of the things, right? They might have been working on function A and now they're working on function B, but you're mitigating a lot of that piece.
The learning curve becomes incremental rather than monumental.
Right, exactly. And kind of to that point, in a lot of cases, you might be able to share resources in the transition period, right? So as they're ramping down here, they're ramping up there, and you're able to kind of leverage that transition effectively to reduce that impact as well. You can take similar work from multiple different places and move into common backlog. So what I mean by that, again, if you have visibility to a broader set of capabilities or a broader set of functionality that's being looked to be delivered, even if they're coming from different business organizations, you have better visibility in order to say, well, let's figure out how to get more efficiency out of that piece of delivery. Let's see, how can we group that into a place where we can, write it once for both of these portions of the organization, rather than having to redevelop it multiple times. I talked about this one a little bit, so I'll move past it pretty quickly, but if you're using a partner, or even if you're working internally, that predictability will reduce cost, or should reduce cost, right? And the last one, and this is one that, again, if I go back to this, what you might be able to do is effectively establish the value delivery as the item that gets, that you're accountable to, rather than a time and materials type of a contract. And there's a bunch of different ways that bunch of different forms that this can take, but it really drives a focus on, hey, even if it takes a few more hours to deliver this function or this story, you're still gonna pay the same amount, right? And that also adds predictability for you as an organization to be able to say, okay, I know how much this is gonna cost versus where there might be some unpredictability that comes with the time materials type of approach.
Do you typically see that then reflected in the statement of work or whatever contractual?
It's got to be. I mean, you can't really do that. There's no way to do that translation after the fact, right? So that's got to be upfront in terms of you've got to make an agreement. Now that, again, that's a bullet point that's probably got a whole presentation associated with it, but that is an option for you to talk through. And again, there are some drawbacks there too, right? I mean, one of the things you have to really work on is having a clear understanding of, well, if you let's say you use StoryPoint as an example as kind of that element, right? Well, let's make sure that we're agreed as an organization on what a story point is. And it also goes off in this other place where story points are not supposed to be exact reflections of effort. So there's some complexity that happens there too. But.
I think that goes back to one of the things, one of the bullet points I think earlier in your slides was that shared risk and shared value, shared reward, if you will, shared gains that come out of the effort.
Yep.
That if you can reflect that in the statement of work or whatever contractual document you create, that you're more likely to get the intended outcome rather than dissatisfaction on one side or the other.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, the piece of the equation that's missing there is you have to establish your velocity. What are you expecting for your velocity through
Yep.
the life of the agreement? And then from there you can start to extrapolate out of big budgets. What does that equate to, and figure that out.
Right. So some of it is, you've got to have some idea of what this is going to be, right? Even if you're trying to establish that up here at the beginning, having an idea and having experience. Again, this is why this is not the first project that you necessarily do this way. If you have some idea of what that looks like, though, you can make some assumptions, and then you build in some room for movement, right? But you build in some assumptions at the front, and you go from there.
Okay, Luke, we got like 5 minutes.
Yep. I'm almost wrapped up. So long-term considerations. So some of this, part of the challenge of this type of an approach is inherently because it spans multiple teams over a long period of time, and it's at a larger scale. It's going to come with some complexities that may not exist within a project-based approach, right? So things like having that level of ongoing coordination and rigor and visibility over multiple years can be tricky, right? And we've seen that with some of our customers where staying in sync and making sure that as resources move in and out and those sorts of things that we're always well aligned, it's hard, right? And I think there's been situations where we've had to learn and adjust and continue to iterate through what that looks like. So, I mean, that's an important piece of this as well. Scope management, again, if we had an Agile conversation, the conversation about how do you manage scope effectively could spend 20, 30 minutes on, right? Because what you want to enable from a product owner standpoint is, hey, come in and talk about what you need and deliver it. But again, you're still people with budgets, right? So you can't always deliver everything that the product owner necessarily asks for. None of that goes away with this, right? That's still a really important piece that you need to be able to consider as part of this as well. Maintaining that high efficiency. So Lance, as you were kind of talking about, establishing a velocity and then aligning to that velocity and maintaining that velocity over a long period of time is tricky too, right? Resources move in and out. The level of complexity changes with the piece that you're looking for. So being able to maintain that high level of efficiency over a long period of time is a challenge and something that you have to actively manage. You have to drive benchmarks and checkpoints and all those things to really make sure that you're doing that well. And the last thing is really around making sure that you're leveraging some of those partnerships that I was talking about before to continue to make sure that you're pivoting to emerging technologies, right? That you're not using this long-term approach that you're not avoiding conversations around, well, when should we pivot from UI5 Fiori to React or BTP or Flutter or whatever those things are, right? Making sure that those conversations are still happening and that you're able to pivot and adjust accordingly as an org. Last thing, we can talk about this a little bit, but these are a lot of the things that we hear as a detracting, right? Agile doesn't work in ERP. I hope that one's been mostly debunked by now. We've been really successful in particular places, especially around user experience, where Agile works really well in ERP and still works better than waterfall in a lot of those cases. Because it drives that from a product ownership perspective or a user focus, it drives that value proposition much more effectively. We need to wait until, and you can insert here, right? We need to wait until the system is stable. We need to wait until this big implementation is done. Put in big thing coming here before we do user experience. That's a battle that you're going to have to fight within your organization. But if you continue, it's one of those things. If you continue to wait until, you're never going to get to the thing that you need to continue to do, which is focus on UX. And I would say a lot of what we can do with these types of projects is execute these in parallel, even to some of these big other projects that are going on.
I think about you talk about those monumental milestone events that people tend to plan around. A really important tenet or principle, I think, is figure out how you can decouple. And
Yep.
I know, when we've partnered, that's a big part of what we've done is to decouple those monumental milestones from the front end work or the layers on top of that we can keep the elements of user experience consistent regardless of what's going on underneath.
Yep.
And being able to do that helps you maintain that velocity and value.
Yep. And the last two here, and I'll wrap up. Organization isn't set up to be product-based. I think we already talked about this actually with one of Joe's questions, comments, which was, I think if you can get a small win, and if you can get an opportunity for this to be successful, you're going to be able to demonstrate how that product base or that product approach can provide a lot of value for your business and for even you as an IT organization. And the last but not least is this, a lot of this depends on, hey, I need to have a lot of work in the queue to get done, right? And specifically with what I'm talking about, a lot of work that results in driving a user experience type of a change for an organization. You know, I think what I would recommend here is go and ask your business whether or not they have opportunities for you to improve their user experience. And I think you'll get a demand pipeline pretty quickly, right? We do things at Mindset which, you know, can objectively do that too, right? I think we mentioned, I think it was in one of Jill's presentations, using things like system usability scale. That's a way where you can go out and measure how does your existing application set grade out? Is it good or some version of not good? And that can help define where you have those opportunities and help build the demand pipeline for what you're looking to deliver with this. That's it. That's all I had. Any questions or comments beyond what was already there? All right. Hope there was a couple helpful nuggets in there. But yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to see me. Thank you for coming to this in general. This is a big event for us, a big swing that we're taking with some of our customers. So we really appreciate you taking time. We know you're all busy, so thank you very much.
Okay.